The Nullification Crisis. Around the year of 1830, Southerners are becoming concerned over federal authority, concerned over the amount of power that the federal government has over the states. And in South Carolina, those fears are especially pronounced, particularly the fear over whether or not the federal government could ban slavery. South Carolina, this is a big fear because South Carolina is the only state where slaves were a majority. So if slavery were banned and slaves were freed, like abolitionists were calling for, then white people in South Carolina would overnight become the minority population within their own state. Slavery, however, is too controversial of an issue to really bring up. There's a gag order, in fact, in Congress over not discussing issues of slavery during part of the 1830s. So instead, the tariff is used as kind of a proxy issue. The tariff is used as a way to measure federal power over states, especially southern states. And if we're talking about the tariff, we need to remember that the two different regions of the country had a very different perspective on tariffs. From the northern perspective, tariffs were good. They made foreign goods more expensive, so people bought more US goods and northern industries profited. However, from the southern perspective, not only did tariffs make foreign goods more expensive and help US firms, but European countries would retaliate by buying less southern cotton. And to appease merchants in their countries, Europeans might put counter tariffs or tariffs of their own in response on American made goods, making American made goods or American products like cotton more expensive in Europe. The result is that the economy of southern states would suffer. And remember, in 1828, before Jackson is even in office, Congress passes the Tariff of Abominations that raised tariffs across the board on almost all products to really high, historically high levels. And right after the Tariff of Abominations was passed, the South Carolina Exposition was published. And it was written anonymously by Vice President John C. Crazy Eyes Calhoun, in which he stated that states can ignore or nullify a law that they think is unconstitutional. Is this true? Can a state really ignore a federal law? Well, that's going to be decided in the Senate. It's going to be decided in what's known as the Webster-Hayne debate, with Daniel Webster squaring off against Francis Hayne from South Carolina, and Daniel Webster absolutely wipes the floor with Hayne. He delivers what has been called the most eloquent speech ever given before Congress. He uses lines that are going to be paraphrased and copied by Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address. He's going to give statements that are going to be copied by one of the Dakotas in their state motto. Webster schools Hayne and points out that no, states cannot defy a law and states cannot leave the Union. So that's the opinion of Congress. Jackson, on the other hand, well, really, Jackson is kind of in the middle on this issue. Jackson is a defender of states' rights. Remember, he had allowed Georgia to completely ignore the treaties that gave Indians in Georgia land and allowed the state of Georgia to just steal that land from them despite what the Supreme Court had said. Jackson is a strict constructionist. He's not really big for implied powers, especially when it comes to something like a Bank of the United States. But he recognizes that nullification, allowing a state to ignore a law that the federal government passes, is a threat to the Union. He agrees federal power should be limited, but states are not sovereign entities. They're not their own separate country. They are a part of the whole. In 1832, while Jackson is in office, a new tariff is passed, but it's not much lower. And as expected, the South Carolina state legislature nullifies the law. They pass bills through their lawmaking body that forbid federal tax collectors from collecting the tariff in the state of South Carolina. Whether or not they're allowed to do that is up for debate. Jackson says no. Jackson tells Congress to get to work on a law giving authority to the military to go into South Carolina and enforce the tariff. But he also tells Congress to get to work on a compromise tariff at the same time. Congress passes the force bill, which does just what Jackson asked. It gives Congress the authority to use the military, or gives Jackson, rather, the authority to use the military to enforce the tariff. But he also issues a proclamation to South Carolina at the same time, a warning. He declares that nullification is treason. Treason, one of those crimes, federal crimes, punishable by death. But the Union is saved by, once again, the great compromiser Henry Clay, with the compromise tariff of 1833 that he shepherds through Congress. In exchange, South Carolina agrees to the tariff, but just as a little stick it to you, just as, because they're stubborn, South Carolina nullifies the force bill. So they really got what they wanted. Is the issue of state power truly resolved in 1833? Certainly not. In fact, that will not be resolved until it's settled on the battlefield with the Civil War in the 1860s.